I know what you're thinking. What is RABS? Well, the chances of your vehicle having RABS is slim to none, but the chances of you having ABS, well, that's also slim to none because you're f***ing lazy. But your vehicle probably does have ABS. Now, my truck has ABS, but it's rear biased. So a RABS module stands for Rear Anti-Lock Braking System, and I'm going to replace mine today. It's going to be pretty straightforward, so let's jump right in. The rear anti-lock braking system continually monitors rear wheel speed with a RABS sensor mounted in the rear axle housing. When the teeth on a RABS sensor ring mounted on the ring gear pass the RABS sensor pole piece, an AC voltage is induced in the sensor circuit with a frequency and amplitude proportional to the average rear wheel speed. In the event of an impending lockup condition during braking at vehicle speeds above approximately 5 miles per hour, the anti-lock electronic control module modulates hydraulic pressure to the rear wheel cylinders. This inhibits rear wheel lockup. Makes sense, right? Yeah, I didn't understand most of that either. But essentially the job of the module is to modulate how much fluid is being sent to the rear wheels. That's what gives you that pulsing feeling when you slam on your brakes in the event that you need to, slam on your brakes. Most vehicles have four-wheel ABS. This truck has rear-wheel ABS. Now that we know what the module does, let's replace the one on my truck. Looking at the back of the driver front wheel, let's move up and find that module. Here it is with a ton of spider webs too. As you can see, there are 2 brake lines entering the module, as well as an electrical connector to the left side. The line to the left travels up to the master cylinder. The one to the right goes to the rear brakes. Let's remove these first. This one is 7/16, and you will need a flare nut wrench like this one to remove these brake lines. You may need to place a container underneath to catch any fluid that may leak out. I'm in the process of replacing everything, so my brake lines are completely empty. Once that line is disconnected, we can move on to the next one. This line is a 1/2 inch. Go ahead and remove it, and then we can move on. Once your line is disconnected, yours won't move around like mine. This line isn't connected to the master cylinder yet, hence the reason it's kind of like floating. Now we can disconnect the electrical connector. You just need to push down on this tab here and then give it a pull. However, due to the age of my truck, this one's kind of stuck on there. And this isn't necessary, nor was it intentional, but you can pull the connector off of that plastic clip to give yourself some extra slack in the harness. This will give you enough room to get 2 hands on the harness to make it easier to pull them apart. Just press the tab down and give it a pull. Perfect. Now it's disconnected. Now you can push the left side of the harness back into the plastic clip. Just like that. At this point, there is nothing connected to the RABS module and it can be removed. You need to locate the 3 nuts on the other side of the frame that hold the module in place. On the driver's side, just look to the right of your strut and spring. Those are your 3 nuts and they are 1/2 inch. Go ahead and begin to loosen them. If you need to, clean them up a bit with a wire brush and then spray some penetrating fluid onto the threads. This nut was full of debris and gunk, so my socket wouldn't fit over it. I'll get back to that in a little bit. Loosen your second nut. I would highly suggest you all grab a wire brush and clean all 3 of these nuts to make things easier on you. Now loosen the third nut. You should be able to unscrew each stud by hand. These studs should remain in the RABS module and the nut should just unscrew. However, due to the age again and debris surrounding the studs, mine came off altogether. I'll show you what I mean when we look at the new one. Now you can carefully maneuver your RABS module around your brake lines and out. Here's your new RABS module, and here are the 3 studs it comes with. Make sure you put the old module next to the new one to make sure you have the right one. Mine looks perfect. Now the new one I bought does not come with new nuts, so I'm going to need to remove the nuts from the old studs and transfer them over. There's 1. There's 2. And unfortunately this one would not come off. You can grab one end with vice grips and then try to use a wrench to turn the nut off. However, as you can see right here, the stud screws in perfectly into the new module. So I'm just going to reuse this one and replace the other 2 with new studs. Since this one has a nut on the stud, I'm going to leave it off until I have a module mounted in place. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Go ahead and screw in the other 2 studs and make them hand tight. When you screw the nut on, it will tighten the studs into the module. Alright, here are the 3 holes for the studs to go through, and these 2 studs I'm going to place through these 2 holes. So go ahead and maneuver the RABS module around the brake lines and put it in place. Then grab a nut and begin screwing it onto one of the studs. I'll switch camera angles once I screw it hand tight. Okay, so there's the one nut I mentioned a moment ago. Now let's screw the second nut to the stud. Alright, now grab the old stud with the nut still attached and begin screwing it in. Once that's done, you can torque them down between 12 and 17 foot-pounds. If you want to find torque specs like these, check out the online manual I have linked in the description below. My torque wrench doesn't go down that far, so I'm going to just hand tighten these 3 nuts. What I like to do in these situations is wait until I feel a little bit of resistance, and then I will turn the nut another quarter to half a turn. Do the same with the other 2, and then we can move on. Now switch to the other side and first connect your electrical connector. You will need to twist the connector like this in order to line up the tab with the factory harness and then push it into place, just like that. Let's get those brake lines installed. First you need to remove the green and red caps. If you have pliers, save yourself some time and use them. These caps are in there pretty tight. Then grab the correct brake line and screw it in. That's not the right line. There we go. Just remember, the larger brake line connects where the red cap is located and the smaller line goes with the green. Here are the torque specs for these lines if you plan on going by them. Now tighten down the line with your 7/16 flare nut wrench. Then remove the red cap and install the other brake line. Again, to save yourself some time, use a pair of pliers. Now grab your 1/2 inch flare nut wrench and tighten the line down. You're not finished yet. You now need to bleed the brakes. There are a few methods when it comes to bleeding brakes, one of which we have on our channel already. That's the 2-person brake bleeding method. But before I get into that, let me show you which order to bleed the brakes on these older F-150s. First, you want to start with the passenger rear, then move on to the driver rear. Now you may think the front passenger is next, however that's incorrect. We also need to bleed the RABS module. As you can see, it has a bleeder screw right here. This needs to be bled before bleeding the front brake calipers. Once that is bled, you can move on to the passenger front and finally the driver front. That's the first pass. You will then need to bleed everything again, but this time you bypass the RABS module. So, passenger rear, passenger front, and finally driver front. Essentially, everything gets bled twice except for the RABS module. The process for bleeding brakes is very simple if you have another person to help you. If you are by yourself, you can still bleed your brakes, however the process takes a little longer. Since Rob and I are bleeding the brakes, we will show you the 2-person method. Once your bleeder valve cap is removed and you have the clear tube over the bleeder valve and the proper wrench on the bleeder screw, the person in the car will need to press the brakes. Once the brakes are pressed, the other person can turn the bleeder screw into the open position. Now, when the person in the car feels the brake pedal hit the floor, he or she will need to notify the person with the wrench to close the bleeder valve. The person should then close the bleeder valve, and then the person in the car can lift off of the brake pedal. Repeat these steps until there aren't any more visible air bubbles in the clear tube. Proceed to the next caliper and repeat the process. That's all there is to it. If you found any part of this video helpful or entertaining, please give it a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button as well as the notification bell so you don't miss a video from our channel. Thanks for watching and we'll see you on the next one.